Welcome to Build a Business Worth Buying, the podcast where seasoned entrepreneurs, M&A experts, and world-class operators share behind-the-scenes stories of building, scaling, and selling remarkable businesses. I'm your host, Aaron Alpeter, and every week I sit down with people shaping the world of acquisitions, founders who cashed out, buyers with bold strategies, and advisors who help make deals happen. This is not a podcast for beginners. It's for those who know the grind and want actionable insights to make their next big move. Get ready to take notes, rethink your strategy, and hear untold stories of what it takes to build a business worth buying. Our guest today has a very rare perspective in the M&A world. So Dave DiGiacomo is not only a partner at Michael Best, where he leads the firm's cannabis practice and drives middle market M&A deals, but he's also a former founder, and he's built and sold his own organic dog food company. So as a first-hand operator, it gives him a good, deep understanding of what makes a business worth buying and what makes a nightmare to do diligence on. David's firm, Michael Best, has supported exits from $10 million to over $200 million, and he's personally led the acquisition of 37 cannabis retail locations. He's seen it all, everything from regulatory chaos to founder drama, and today he's going to help us pull back the curtain on how deals actually get done, what legal teams really care about, and how to set yourself up for a clean, fast, and high multiple exit. Dave, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. One thing I'll note, we actually did a deal that broke $1 billion last year at Michael Best. So,
okay.
Pretty wild. That was a few other members of my team. I tend to focus for sure in the 10 to $200 or $300 million range in that what we call lower middle market. But yeah, our team has done some pretty crazy deals overall. So
yeah, you guys seem to be kind of the best kept secret from what we can tell.
Yeah, we joke about to steal branding of another company, sort of that quiet company mentality. We are, just a true Midwest-based law firm, and we internally talk about how we should figure out how to brag a little bit more about what we do and our work, because we love what we do. We love helping people grow, scale, and sell businesses here. It's one of the best things to do. Obviously, you mentioned I did it before for myself, and after having gone through that, I said, man, I love this whole world. I want to go learn how to help founders do that, grow, scale, and sell, and fortunate to get to do that now for a living, having gone back to school for it. So
yeah, I think your journey is a really interesting one, because unlike most lawyers that I know, you didn't start in law. You weren't kind of the pre-law person that graduated and said, hey, I'm going to go exactly to law school, but you were a founder. So I'd love to get your perspective on what it was like to build and sell your organic pet food business. And what was it that surprised you most about that sell side part of the deal?
Yeah, I mean, it was fun and terrifying. I was much younger and had maybe a different risk profile than I do now with a family and kids. So I pieced together a startup. I realized that there was a market in the early days of organic food for high-end pet food. And I said, I love animals. I love pets. Let's go build a business around serving that and providing good quality products for them that didn't have a bunch of junk in them. It was super fun to go through all that learning. I think I am constantly a nerd. I think of myself as a nerd and just love learning new things throughout every day. And certainly in your own startup, from first starting with figuring out branding and product market fit, and then packaging and delivery and organic certification, and then the scale questions and hiring a team and training a team. Just so many new problems to solve as a founder. I loved every piece of that journey. The flip side, going through selling it, at some point also you wear yourself out doing that as a founder. And so reminding yourself to take the pause, take the break, and go through and enjoy the experience while you're in it. Don't let yourself burn out through that, for sure. Is one of the.
I think you're the only person who went to law as like a rebound career to maybe take a break. You usually don't hear that a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it says something more about me than about anything else. It was a great rebound career. What's funny is here at Michael Best, I think I have at least two partners that I know of who were former founders in a startup that went back to work with startups. So we have a team of people who are like nerdy for venture. Hey, how do I help people work with their scaling, growing business and through the exit? So Yeah, it's been a fun rebound career. I love actually helping people through it from the other side with that founder lens, but also with the ability to detach myself and just give them the advice and support through it. So it's really fun.
What are some of those things that you know now that you wish someone would have told you as a founder?
Yeah, I think I hinted at it. Like, burnout is real for sure in the founder world. You wear all of the hats, you take on all of the risk. There are days where you wonder, is this business going to be alive tomorrow? And then you close that financing round and everything is great. And then you're on the flip side of that. It is in some ways a very manic journey, a fun manic journey. But, remind yourself to enjoy each of those moments and not sweat it as you're going through is probably, it's hard to say when you're outside, but it is fun to do. So.
Yeah, I joke around with my family and friends. They ask, so how the business going? And my response every time is, I celebrate every time we make payroll. And sometimes it's very easy to make payroll. Other times you're like, okay, like let's see what comes in here. But you're right. I mean, that stress as a founder is absolutely real, and so much of it too is you're doing stuff that you've never done before. And so it's not as if it's like, oh, I know this is going to be hard, so I get into it. You might bite something off and then recognize that, oh gosh, this is actually, I thought I was going to do 90%. I actually can only do 10% of this. And so how do I pull this off? So
Yeah.
it's very real.
The number of times I ran into that where I was like, oh, I could do that. And then you're like, no, I really can't. And I need help. It's a good thing to also remind yourself like, oh, there are people out there who specialize in pieces of it, whether it's, branding or marketing or, distribution, depending on the type of business, all of the needs can be solved. You have to surround yourself with good people and solve those questions together. And still lead them in the right way, but remind yourself that there is a path there. So,
yeah, one of the things that, right or wrong, like when I grew up, I was always, you call a lawyer when you're in trouble, or you call a lawyer when you don't want to end up in orange. And so I don't know if I'm unique or just a lot of other founders have this kind of mentality as well, where you try to deal with a lawyer as protection. It's something that you kind of deal with. But as we were talking before this, you really kind of opened my eyes a little bit in terms of, well, there's actually things that you can do with your legal team that actually adds value before a sale, not just mitigating downside. Can you walk me through some of those value adders?
Yeah, I mean, spot on. I honestly, like, as a founder and an entrepreneur, I never thought I would end up in a big law firm. Like, that's the people you call when you're dealing with the big, legal problem, the orange jumpsuit, like that whole thing. We try to be the opposite of that, right? We try to be the ones who you can call as your outside general counsel to help you walk you through and prepare for the transaction and think it through, and do that in a way that's not scary. I mean, part of the challenge of being a lawyer is often, even in the deal, we get called in as sort of the last minute risk, wet blanket on the, hey, lawyer, please don't ruin my whole deal. I put this all together, right? And if you get out ahead of that and you say, hey, let's be smart and proactive, let's get the right people together and say, hey, if we go this way, you can actually make big difference in the outcome, right? Some tax planning a couple of years ahead of your transaction can lead to tens of millions of dollars of difference in your pocket instead, right? And so how do we think that through ahead of time? How do we make this go the right way? I just hit on one of the risks to answer your question more directly is, tax is a driver of a lot of deal structure. And if you are thoughtful about that in some of the planning and preparation, you can really make a difference. We had a founder go through an exit last year, and we did some tax structuring planning that allowed him to defer and set aside some tax for, charitable giving and next generation planning that if we hadn't done in advance, he would have basically paid the same amount in tax to the IRS. And so, some of those strategies, just thinking ahead, can really matter. The other piece is like, we are here for the risk question, as you identified. And you'll get a top line term sheet offer. Somebody will say, hey, we're paying you X. And then everything after that is going to be chipping away at that, right? Every next step of your deal is going to be, hey, there's this risk. I want you to take that founder seller and indemnify me for it. Hey, we discovered you have all this risk. We're just going to take some money off the purchase price, right? Or maybe the earnout won't be as good, right? Because, well, we're just not going to hit those milestones that we thought we were. So we can help you along that path, structure and say, let's stop the big risk fallout by just building ahead for it, making sure everything's clean, right? Making sure when they do open the data room, as whoever it is, a strategic buyer, a PE firm, that they don't see a whole bunch of mess, that everything looks organized, everything looks ready, and being buttoned up can make a difference in how much you have to offer for indemnity and how long you're going to bear the risk as the founder seller. And so, just being proactive really can help. And that's not just true of us, that's true across your team as you get ready for that transaction. So
yeah, there are a lot of really good nuggets in there. And so, let's suppose that I'm thinking of exiting in 3 years. At what point should I start having these conversations with my legal team? Probably not 2 years and 11 months.
Yeah, today is good if you're thinking about 3 years from now. One of the things I love to remind founders, and having gone through the sale myself, I definitely rushed through pieces of it, in part because of the burnout, because of that emotional piece where you're like, I'm ready to be done. Let's go, right? And you have to remind yourself that when you start to shop the deal, when you start to prepare the legal diligence, when you start to go through everything, best case, that's a 6 month to a year cycle, right? And then there's an earnout, probably a year, if not 2, 3, 5 years, where you're staying around and helping operate, transition the business. So if you're thinking about selling your business 3 years from now, know that if you start that deal even a year from now, you're going to be, still involved in the business for 3 or 4 years after that, right? So it's always good to start early. And as I mentioned, some of those tax planning pieces are at least a year, if not 2, 3, 4 out. When you look at 1202, it's been improved under the OMBB, but that starts at the beginning of when you form the business. Did you create a qualifying C Corp that meets the test for 1202 stock under QSBS, right? So sooner is better. A lot of times those choices you make at the beginning can have a long tail, right? So start today, ask today. Often when I get called in at the finish line to clean things up, it's harder, takes more effort from my team, costs more, right? Versus like choose A or B on the form at the beginning and you're down that path and you're good to go. Or, hey, how do we fix this in the last minute? And while you're trying to run a deal, while you're trying to close a deal, while you're trying to run your company and run this side job of preparing legal diligence, answering questions, attending calls with your, buyer, the PE team, or the strategic, like there's just a ton to do. And so time helps you be ready at the finish line.
No, that's super helpful. I'm wondering, do you guys have a framework that you typically use, or maybe a framework we can come up together where, the first thing you need to do as you're kind of 3 years out is think about your tax situation and just there are different types of exits, there are different types of things that you may or may not be interested in. So I imagine that that's a question you should have 3 years out. And then maybe a year or two out, you want to look more at the contracts or legal structures or things like that to kind of be prepared for that data room. Do you guys have something like that is a useful rule of thumb?
Yeah. I mean, we certainly, a lot of times when I have those early conversations with somebody getting ready to sell, I say, let me send you over a sample of a due diligence checklist. Let me show you what you're going to go through in the exam. Because if you prepare for the test, you're going to be more ready for it, right? So Here's the pages of stuff you're going to get asked for. 3 years of taxes, every vehicle title lease, every W-2. Here's the stuff we need to get ready to put in the data room. And so so you can just start as those things come across your desk, dropping it into that share file, dropping it into that folder, so you're ready. So some of those, like I said on the tax stuff, that definitely is, you just have realities of when you file your taxes or the choices you make, and the valuation of the business when you make it can have a big impact. So making those moves now can really help you down the road, right? Based on if the company is continuing to grow, think about those choices now, because the more time you have, the more different forks in the road you can choose is sort of the answer. And then just the reality of, as you think about those contracts or things that are sort of, as you alluded, Aaron, the closer to the finish line, they're, they can be a little bit easier to clean up, but when you go through your contract cycle with your main customers or when your main vendors, suppliers, you need years again for that, right? To just make sure you have the right language in the assignment clause or that you've thought about how you're going to structure that to be prepared. And a lot of times those are easy to negotiate in the commercial contract negotiation. But if you have that language in there, it makes everything easy. If you don't, then you're having this debate at the finish line. When do we contact them and tell them, and how do we ask for permission? That if we just tried a year or two before, we could have closed that door. So there's no hard answer there. Again, 2-3 years ahead of time is a great time to make that call. Reach out, talk to some advisors, talk to a CPA who's helped people with that, talk to an investment banker if you're thinking about going that route, or start to think about what you need to clean up now is great. So
yeah, one of the themes that I'm hearing from you is that you have to have your business ready to exit, but then you also have to be ready as a founder in your personal life to be ready to exit. And so I think so many times we focus on the business aspect, but we don't necessarily think about personal from a tax point of view. Can you say a little bit more about what are some of those things that typically surprise people that are easily avoidable?
Yeah. No, that's right. There are two pieces. Often as a founder, you own a significant portion of this business, and the closing day, while a great thing for a significant paycheck, also it's a great time to think about how much of your net worth is tied up in your business, is probably a ton of it. And how are you preparing for what are the different levers you could pull along the way? I often go through with founders and show them, here's all the different ways you could get paid in a slice of pie. You can get cash at close. You can get seller carry note where the buyer's, asking you to loan some money. You can get an earnout. There's just lots of different ways to structure the deal. And some of those, all of them except for cash. I mean, cash is way less risk for you as the founder because you walk away with it and you're done. You're off to Jamaica or take your pick on, wherever your dream place is, and you're hanging out there with your money. If you aren't getting paid that way, there's a tail of risk. And so, structuring around that can help. And then preparing yourself financially, trust-wise, tax-wise for that when you take that hit, look, we all have to pay taxes, but if sometimes you choose path A or path B on the sale, is it a stock sale? Is it an asset sale? Is it, the earnout payments over time are structured tax different wise? Did I put some of my net worth into a trust because I have enough net worth that I want to do that? Can give you real advantages that make material differences for you and your family as you think about it. And so wearing a little bit of both hats can help. And again, decisions around a trust have to be made well in advance. You have to set up the trust. You have to contribute to the trust. You have to decide and figure out the tax thresholds. So there's lots of questions in there.
Yeah, I can almost imagine you start pulling at this ball of yarn and you're not quite sure when it ends. So
yeah, at the same time, don't mean to overwhelm. It is a little bit of a ball of yarn. And again, just go get a person who does that over and over to say, hey, here's the lay of the land on your business. Here's what I see you have right now. Here are the 3 steps you could take right now. And here's what it costs to work with us. That's any good, reputable service provider will do that. That's what we'll do. We'll say, hey, it'll take X. It'll take X amount of time. Here are the other 2 people you need to involve to get it done. You probably have to get a valuation of your business, which takes time as well, right? So, but, do that now and we can definitely help find that path. So.
Oh, that's great. One of the things that we talked about on our pre-meeting was just that growth is messy, but M&A can't be. And so I want to kind of dig into what does a clean business look like from a legal perspective, and what sorts of issues tend to derail deals?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, certainly growth is messy, right? When you're As we talked about at the start, like putting together your own business, figuring out all the things, pulling in people as you need them, you're trying to solve the puzzle every day. And you may not always have perfect records, books, details of each step, right? But as you think about selling your business to a strategic or to a private equity buyer, as I mentioned, they're going to come up with the top line number and then all the diligence stuff afterwards. And it's not a knock on them. They're just worried about risk, right? They're worried about what they're taking on. And so if things aren't organized or ready or put together, it says to them, there's more risk here, right? And so they start to think about, at least on the legal side, how do we mitigate that, or what are we worried about? And so having it all buttoned up, having everything in the data room ready to go, being able to say, yes, we have this, here's the tax filing from that year, here's the titles to all the vehicles, here's the contract with these particular assignment clauses. Every time you say that through due diligence back to the buyer, it shows them, hey, this is a well-run business. This is a safe business for us to invest in, right? And that's what they're, as a private equity or strategic or other buyer, that's what they're thinking. They're thinking, I have this pool of capital. I'm deploying it for this purpose. I want to grow it. I want to scale it. I want to continue to help move it along. I want to merge it in to add value to whatever it is in our current business line. Their entire lens is, what am I stepping into and how is it going to, create value or create a problem? And if you give any flags that show it's going to create a problem, that is overall deal value that you're leaving on the table, right? So the more you solve that and say, hey, we have all our IP, we have all our trademarks in order, we have, patents to the extent we need them, any of that, like our IP assignments from our team and our founders, like all of the intellectual property is clean and buttoned up. You know what you're buying is good. You're not stepping into a potential lawsuit. I did a deal with a company, merger transaction 2 years ago, and there were 3 of the 4 founders had signed an IP assignment, and they could not find the IP assignment for the 4th founder. We were brought in at the finish line, LOIs already on the table, and now that was a big piece of the puzzle. Hey, one of the main founders who delivered a lot of the critical IP for this SaaS tech company is not, we don't know that we own the IP. What's the question? Can we go back and get it? So it suddenly became a question of like, hey, how are we going to address this? We went through it. We handled it. We brought in our IP team and we made sure the IP was totally buttoned up and in the company and the buyer got comfortable. But instead of the buyer focusing on, great, how are we integrating this thing? How's everything together? There was a major pause. And they said, well, now can we do that? Like, what are we worried about with the deal? Is everything here? Are we going to get, into lawsuits about this? Is the founder going to run away and not bring the IP? Thankfully, that founder was still involved. But imagine if that founder also had already left and gone into their next thing. It was one, the technical founder, and 4 years later, they weren't there at this SaaS tech company. Real risk for the buyer and just creates another block. So again, the more you go through and you say, okay, what's the checklist? What do I need to worry about? What do I have buttoned up? What do I not have buttoned up? Those are the keys to having a successful close.
Yeah, you mentioned something I think is really important. I want to make sure we come back to that, and I want to make sure I have it right. So you talked about how when you get your LOI, you have a number, and typically that is the best case scenario for the number. And as you have more, call it, opportunities for uncertainty or risks to pop up in the buyer's mind, that number can come down. Have you ever seen a situation where the opposite is true, where there's a number and it's totally buttoned up and it's very easy, that the number actually goes up because they see like, wow, this is really well done, and maybe they're worried about it becoming a competitive process. Does that opposite end stay true, or is it really your LOI is your best case number? It's just a matter of keeping it from falling as far as possible.
That opposite version is the exception and not the rule, I would say. Look, if I go in to buy a car and I'm buying a really nice car and I tell the guy, hey, I buy this car for $50,000 and he says yes. And then 2 days later, the market jumps and cars are worth $70,000 because of whatever else is happening. But we had a signed LOI for it. I'm going to get that car at $50,000, even though I went through and the market changed and the due diligence changed. There is a reality here. The LOI is non-binding. He doesn't have to close, at that much of a delta. Probably the parties walk away, right? You're like, okay, this is a 30% change in the. Lawyers shouldn't do math live on podcasts, by the way. But suddenly there's a material change in the value. So yes, the parties can come back, and the guy who has the car who's selling it to me could say, "Hey, Dave, like it just doesn't make sense. What can you bring to the table?" But you heard what has to happen. There's this conversation. Hey, I can't sell you the car for 50, and you as the founder look really bad, right? Saying, "Hey, I'm selling you the thing, but it's worth more than what we talked about." And these are private businesses, so it's not like a car. There isn't a clear marketplace. Sure. There isn't a clear number out there where you're like, I just saw that same car sell for 70 next door. Like, what are you talking about? Maybe there's 2 other businesses like yours out there that are selling for that number, or 10 deals in the last 6 years that you can go and look out, and we have data on that from PitchBook and lots of other sources out there, where you can say, gosh, I can tell what this business is generally worth. It's worth a 12x multiple. It's worth a 7x multiple. And so you get into the earnings and you say, hey, buyer, we mismatched on the price. That just doesn't happen. Most of the time what happens is you come up with the top line number, and then they start just kicking the tires on all the other problems, and they say, well, these tires are bald. The alternator has a weird thing going on. Why doesn't this window in the back roll down, right? That's more the conversation that's going to start to happen. And to continue that car analogy, they're going to say, well, now I got to fix the window. So that's a couple grand. I got to replace the alternator. There's X in that. New set of tires is Y. And so how about we pay you 42, right? So now the number just got knocked down. And that is much more common in the scenario. What I always remind people is whatever you put in the LOI and what you sign, you don't have to close the deal. In most cases, it's a non-binding LOI, and you're just going to go through to the closing. But whatever you put in the LOI is likely what's in your closing. And the only way it's not in your closing is if you go back and renegotiate it as a material change. And so what is in the LOI is that they're going to do diligence, that you're going to provide indemnity for a bunch of risk, and that the projected price is X, but you have a whole bunch of other question marks before you get to the finish. What is not in the LOI is almost every deal I've ever seen. There isn't and at 3 months from now, we'll reprice it based on the market pricing on the top line.
Yeah,
right?
that doesn't happen. Yeah. No, I think the car analogy, you're buying a house, definitely makes sense there. What are those sorts of common questions that the buyer wants to see in the data room that you can kind of take off the table by being prepared and just putting your best foot forward once they see your data for the first time?
Yeah. I mean, I'll caveat that this is business dependent, and sure. you have to, in each case, talk about specifics. Again, they're concerned about, risk of that business. So is it a manufacturing business? Does it have a bunch of real estate? You have something very different. Or is it a SaaS tech company that is super IP heavy, that has a secret sauce technology? In either case, they want to make sure you own the stuff, that there isn't a lawsuit waiting out there around it, because litigation's expensive, to your point. Most people only want to call lawyers when they have the real big risk problem on the table, right? So they're worried about that. They're worried about how easy is it going to be to move over the assets or the team to integrate them. Is this something we can work with? And so again, if it looks like a professional, well-run organization, the buyer's going to say, this is amazing. I know this team runs well. They know what they're doing. They've kept it up really good, and they're going to merge in super well and integrate. So, very specifically, I went over on the IP side. Is all the IP in the company? Is it wrapped up in the company? Is the trademark or other branding important to them, and is that protected? Is there anything patentable were the patents done right? We built a whole tool here at Michael Best to test and make sure the patents are good, and to compare the market value of the patents based on the full patent portfolio within the USPTO. So is there something there that is valuable, or is there risk that somebody is going to come out of the woodwork and sue us? Those are the sort of dance questions. Same on employment. Are these employees classified right? Do I have a risk that I'm going to have, a bunch of lawsuits in California, or has the HR function been run well? A lot of those can be structured around on an asset deal, but, the reality is they're worried about some sort of successor risk. And is this team running well? Is it a good professional team? Similar, is there a real estate component? Is the real estate transferable or assignable? Can we move it over? Are the commercial contracts something we can move and integrate, right? If we buy the business and we can't bring over the top 3 customers, that's a real problem. So every single step is like, is the value here and can we move it? Or is there, are we going to be playing whack-a-mole with problems later that pop up? So
for sure. And I imagine that there probably isn't any such thing as like a perfectly clean business from day one and all the way through to the exit. I'm sure it's a bit of
to meet that founder. Just saying, if we can find it, I'd love to.
Yeah, maybe it'll be your next business that you start afterward when you need a rebound from being a lawyer. But I guess, like, what are those issues that, if they're saved to the last end, are really expensive to fix late in the game? You've mentioned IP a couple of times. Is there anything else beyond that can just be an absolute headache if you're not clean to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, IP is definitely a leader. I think the commercial contracts, buying yourself as much time there to make those movable, it's one of those that, like, if you have the more runway, you can likely, because contracts come up in a regular occurrence with your customer and you renegotiate or change things. And when you're working with your top customer, did you put the right clause in there? Can be a really easy one to get away with. So that one is definitely a start sooner than later thinking about. Any employment issues at all, like making sure your HR is buttoned up for sure, that you're not, accidentally creating a pension plan or some extended post-employment liability, are the leaders that come to mind. I think, title to assets, making sure they're transferable are usually the top things that we think through. Like I said, happy to always early on when I meet with people be like, hey, here's a due diligence checklist and let's go through it in, a little bit more boring detail. And I have some video content coming out on that as a follow-up. So if anybody who's listening says, hey, I'd love to just, understand due diligence, we'll have some of that coming out soon as well. So happy to share that with you and your listeners if helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. A lot of times when there's an exit, the founder is involved in some way. It's very rare that, like, you close on a Tuesday and money's in your bank account Tuesday afternoon and then you're done. You're always sticking around as an advisor, or there's a pure earnout. What have you seen in terms from a structure perspective or from a transition point of view that helps keep both sides aligned and avoid resentment as the deal is consummated?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think of the phrase incentives align outcomes. And so, if you have the right incentives, you'll drive the right outcome. And so what I have seen are earnouts that are really well thought through in the detail. A lot of times the earnouts will be too high and they'll be structured around, how many clients are brought over, or what percentage of the revenue is brought over. And from the founder perspective, going through that exit, you're in so little control after closing for a bunch of that, where the business line ends up, how successful it is. And so I'm always cautious when I work with people and say, hey, you have an earnout that's like really heavily, you're going to stay around. You're going to be there for at least a year, if not longer, in most cases, right? There are some rare businesses where, hey, the management team can handle this, and like, I'm a redundant CEO, I'm out in 3 months. But for the most part, as the leader, as the founder, you're wanted there for a while to help make sure the customers and the team integrate and that everything goes well. At the same time, it's really hard to think of this when you've founded and built your business. Post-closing, you are not the owner of your business anymore, and you are now just a manager in someone else's business. And some of those key decisions that you are used to making on the fly and turning around quickly are no longer yours to make, right? And so a lot of, thinking through how the incentives of me bringing over the team, me successfully integrating, are around, hey, how many dollars come over? And the thresholds are often set pretty high. And so you just want to be really thoughtful about how you're aligned to, earn more as a team to grow the pie together, and that your buyer is also aligned to grow the pie. So often it's like, oh, well, if I just bring over 90% of the customers and make them stick for 2 years, I'll get earnout X. And it's like, you have zero control over that after closing. Yeah. Maybe 10% control over it. But the flip side is if like both parties get incentivized to grow the business, that does well. So no perfect answer. I like typical lawyer, I'll say it depends, but that's my rationale for most of them.
Well, that's the same answer for supply chain too. It's always depends. But so it sounds like you're in favor of kind of revenue thresholds as kind of the earnout metric of, hey, we want to grow this thing by 10% over what the acquisition revenue was. Am I reading into that right?
I think generally, yes. With the caveat that you also need to be careful about, hey, we're growing this together, and the buyer will be the driver of how you grow and what markets you target and where that revenue gets recognized and when and how. And so minimizing some of that ability to, miss the mark or play games. Not that anyone would do that nefariously. It's just, again, incentives and outcomes. You get what you pay for. So you want to make sure your buyer is also aligned in that.
Yeah. Now, as we mentioned at the beginning, you've been involved with $10 million deals and $300 million deals, and Michael Best has done billion-dollar deals. I imagine those deals are a little bit different. And so what are some of the things that are the same from a $10 million deal to a $300 million deal, and what things are different?
Yeah. In some ways, the amount of risk as a buyer that you're looking at in either of those deals is potentially the same, right? Like, say I'm buying a warehouse and it has a, land that's been contaminated with something. Now I have like a environmental CERCLA situation. The potential risk to me as a buyer is exactly the same. Say I'm buying a lawsuit with an employee who, has a age discrimination case. Risk is the same for the buyer. And so, interestingly, the risk being the same from $10 to $300 million deal is part of, what drives what we do. At the same time, like the likely buyer in a $300 million deal versus a $10 million deal is very different. And especially even a little bit further up, but you're looking at a different sophisticated PE buyer in all of those higher end deals, and a buyer who's, probably more likely a strategic as well as you move up chain, right? Just that's the nature of scale and business and what people will be looking for. So it's interesting to think about like what's totally different. The buyers at the lower end may not be, as sophisticated. They're still going to be super sophisticated parties by the time you get to a $10 million total EV. And they're going to bring in counsel and think about the risk because the risk is the same on that small deal to the big deal. But, the buyers in that larger size may be looking for very different things. They're maybe looking for you to be the leader of that private equity roll-up, or they're looking for you to be that one strategic bolt-on that's going to double the size or really grow their business versus like, 10 million to 30 million can be a lot more sort of bolt-on, tuck-in, add-in to our business. And so the way that the buyer will be thinking about the deal, probably very different. The risk for us as, buy-side counsel in that would be basically the same. So it's an interesting puzzle.
That is interesting. Does the sell side counsel math change between a $10 million and a $300 million deal?
I think, again, like scale leads to complexity a lot of times too, right? So if you have a $300 million business, you're probably in a lot more locations. You have multiple offices, multiple team members, different levels of management and tiers. A $10 million deal, a lot of times is a smaller team, right? It's just like total transaction. So in a lot of cases as sell side counsel, we on that smaller transaction are much more, directly involved with the original founder and team. And a lot of times by you get to that $300 million deal or $200+ million deal, there's a a little bit more of a management team in place. And so, how we go through the deal looks different. How we think about the buyer is different. But, the transaction structure is remarkably similar is my comment on the tail is like, we're still going to do the same type of deal. The levels of integration, the number of office locations, the number of professional management as a company scales just naturally will be different, right? So
yeah, makes a lot of sense. I want to shift a little bit over to cannabis because you have such a unique perspective as the practice leader for it. You've done dozens of deals. I think we talked 37 was the number that I quoted at the beginning.
yeah.
These are often very fragmented, highly regulated markets. What have those deals taught you about structuring for complexity and risk?
Yeah. I mean, so much to unpack in there. I started doing cannabis transaction work in 2014 here in Colorado with some of the first rec legalization. And a lot of the early deals were just investment for companies that were growing. And then, in 2017, 18, started working on transactions, buying and selling businesses over and over for lots of large players. And I think 37 was a number that we've done for a particular client. We have done hundreds of transactions in that space.
Wow.
Again,
do they get like a frequent flyer coupon or something when they have that level?
It's an interesting market. It's been super fun. I've loved working with the founders there. They are much more risk tolerant, as you may imagine, than your average founder, just given the nature of what they do for a living. So, founders selling businesses there will have missed some of the steps that we're talking about. Hey, we need to make sure we button this up. It's also an emerging market. So all of the things about, an emerging market are there, boom and bust cycles that they've gone through. I would argue at least 3 ups and downs at this point. We're in a fairly down point, but maybe starting to come out. We'll see what the regulatory environment is. Access to capital is also incredibly hard in cannabis. So just due to our federal regulatory scheme, dealing with 280E and the fact that most banks won't put money into the space, there is not a lot of private equity acquisitions. So you're seeing a lot of closely held business, a lot of, waiting and seeing from people in adjacent industries saying, hey, this, does this make sense along with our alcohol business? We're taking a portion of risk. Publicly there are multiple deals recently of people who are buying, bits of a cannabis business who also have a alcohol or other beverage business and trying to figure out that business. It's been super fun. There's just a lot there. The thing I would say is that has made deals really interesting. I mean, we've done a couple $100 million deals in the space, and the amount of risk that the buyers are willing to take and look at is also different. And yet, a true sophisticated buyer, once you get above a $10 million equity value for a business, is going to still ask, like, what's my risk of going to jail for this? What's my risk of having a massive lawsuit for this? And, if you're doing something that isn't cleaned up, if it's not buttoned up, if the, risk on the debt or the credit or the customer base is there, it's going to still come into play in the same way. So, and in fact, maybe even more so, because the buyer's going to say, well, look, we could go and do this. It's an emerging industry. We could go do this on our own, in another way. There are some really unique moats, obviously, based on the regulatory structure, based on you can only own so many businesses in certain jurisdictions. There's only a limited number of licenses in a lot of states. So there's still a lot of issues and challenges to think through. The puzzle pieces are as fun as any, if I can be honest. It's what I love about it is, it's a regular M&A or, finance transaction. And then also there's just all this other stuff you have to figure out along with it. So,
yeah, I kind of want to build on that with what you talked about with highly regulated or emerging markets. Oftentimes in those environments, the founder's wearing a dozen hats, probably a dozen more than they're used to. So how do you coach these founders in terms of trying to professionalize their business without causing them to burn out or lose their soul?
Yeah, I I think well-run businesses are, you know, often the ones that are better protected for that. And professionalizing your business does not mean you have to give up your soul. Like putting it together, you can be authentically you and still run your business well. Being a good leader and a good manager means, you know, showing people the way and making sure that who you bring in to help you is aligned with that goal and that vision, right? So making your business run better, making sure your team is happier, making sure you're more incentivized, making sure your primary customers are more incentivized does not mean you should stop doing whatever it is that makes you unique and fun. It means you should protect that, in fact. So like my counter is like a well-run business is actually the best way to protect your culture, your values, your ideals. All of that gets harder with scale. Having grown and scaled a team and brought in other people, it's critically important as you grow to lead that team where you want to go, and doing that in an organized way helps them continue to develop value for your team. So, I had that initial reaction. I came from a startup founder, small law firm, to merging in with Michael Best and becoming our Denver office presence here with my partner. And I had that moment of like, hey, we're going to this like big professional organization, with a larger team. We internally, I fight that every day. We want to manage a great team, and Michael Best is dedicated to that same thinking of like, hey, how do we make sure that we can stay the cool entrepreneurial minded people in a large law firm? So doing it well, doing it together requires dedication, but it ultimately makes more opportunity for the rest of your team to grow with you. So, I think do it now because it will only help you to be better at what you really want to do and what you love.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's a bit of a false choice to say that you either have a soul or you're authentic as your business or you're well run. Because I think you're absolutely right. Like you should be well run. That's how you know you have an actual business as opposed to a hobby or something
Yeah,
that's just helping you pass the time.
yeah, and an authentic, well-run business is not a paradox, right? It is something we all strive for, and I think you have to be deliberate about it. But it's what really actually is the secret. I mean, if you look all the way up to the largest of arguably most successful businesses in the world at Google, they have a very unique culture that
Yeah.
they have brought to that massive scale, right? And I think it started with the founders of that business and continues today. And, I don't know them outside of what I hear publicly. I'm not engaged with them or anything, but like, when you look from the outside, that's a reality. You can maintain your culture and build your business professionally. So,
Cool. Well, Dave, this has been a fantastic conversation. Before I let you go, we've got two questions that we always like to ask our guests. The first one, and this can be from either clients that you've worked with or just things that you've read. But what's the best example of a moat that you've seen a business build?
yeah. I mean, that you sent me this question in advance, and I thought about it a little bit. I mean, obviously, in the cannabis industry, I've seen some pretty interesting moats that are built around regulatory and other structural things. I actually had the inverse reaction. I was like, these are great moats for a very narrow window. That moat's not going to last, right?
Yeah.
What really will last for making a business is being really good at what you do, being the best at what you do, and continuing to deliver value. And so I thought back to, some of the business models. I think if you think about a business like Costco and you want to talk about a moat, like that is an incredible moat, right? They have built an incredible brand that is trusted by their customer, that they are not going to take more than 10% profit ever off the top of what they do. And I trust that every time I walk into that store, and I'm willing to spend my money because I'm like, they're delivering value to me every day, and they're delivering it as efficiently as they can. And they've made it part of their brand to make their customer aware of that value. So I've seen lots of businesses that built, moats of all kinds, but the true moat is being a value add and caring about doing a good job for your client and your customer, whatever that is, whoever that is, and making sure they're aware that like you're there to help them and serve them. And that goes from all sides of business. So
I love that. Last question is, if you had to start over today, how would you go about building a business worth buying?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of our conversation about building a unique culture and professionalizing at the same time, and like how do you do those two together? I'm not about to go wear a founder hat, to be honest, but having worn one in the past and been through that, I'm not in the stage of life to make that leap right now. But I think overall, I would look at like what's the addressable market. Early on, when I was very young, I met someone who was part of the family with the original patent on the rabbit ear antenna that everybody had on top of their television set, and I'm like, what a great business! Like everyone had one of those, and then everyone went to 3 and 5 of them in their house at some point, and we all had them and we all used them. So I would start at the top of what's that, and then I would think about how I could do that with what I talked about in the moat concept of providing true value to those people, and doing it well, doing it with heart as you provide that value. So I think running it well is key at every step. So
love it. Well, Dave, this has been fantastic. I certainly learned a lot. I can't believe that our hour is up. If people want to get in touch with you to learn more or get a hold of that due diligence checklist, what's the right way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can shoot me an email anytime. It's a little bit of alphabet soup. It's DM and then my last name, DiGiacomo @michaelbest.com. You can Google me and find us on the website, DiGiacomo Michael Best. You'll find me. Shoot me an email. My number is also on the website, so feel free to reach out. Like I said, I am happy to share content, meet with people early, and talk through, hey, here's what I would think about. Here's what a roadmap to work with us on that would look like. So I think any good service provider will do that and talk you through, hey, here's how we can help you. And I love doing that, and I do that all the time. So happy to do it.
Thanks for joining me on Build a Business Worth Buying, brought to you by ISBA Consulting. I hope today's conversation gave you real insights into scaling smarter, selling better, and thinking like a strategic operator. If you found value in this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's building their own sellable business. Until next time, remember, the real win isn't just building a business, it's building one worth buying.